Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into the world of sustainable eating and focusing on the farm to fork movement. We've got all the research laid out, and we're going to break down, like the most impactful takeaways and give you some practical tips you can actually use. Think of this as your cheat sheet to being a more eco-conscious eater, without having to wade through a ton of information.
That's a great way to put it. Farm to fork can seem a little daunting at first, but it really just comes down to making thoughtful choices about where your food comes from and how it gets to your plate.
Right, so it's not just about shopping at farmers markets, right? Like,
Yes.
what's the big picture we're looking at here?
It's about understanding that our food choices have these ripple effects. They impact the environment, the economy, and even our own health. Farm to fork is really trying to address all of that. By shortening the journey, our food takes from the farm to the table.
That makes sense. Like, the shorter the trip, the less fuel and resources are used, right? But what are some of the less obvious benefits? How does this impact me directly?
Well, one major perk is reducing food waste. Have you ever thought about how much food spoils before it even reaches the grocery store? Shorter supply chains mean fresher produce for you, and just less waste overall.
So my veggies are happier and I'm throwing away less food? That's definitely a win-win.
Okay, but what about the impact on the farmers themselves? Does this approach benefit them as well?
Absolutely. When you buy directly from local farmers, either at markets or through programs like community-supported agriculture, you're cutting out the middlemen
Mhm.
and making sure they get a fairer share of the profits.
That's like cutting out the corporate maze and letting the farmers keep more of what they earn. I like that. But I have to admit, sometimes all this talk about sustainable and organic feels a little overwhelming. Like, do I need to turn into a full-blown farmer to make a difference?
Not at all. It's not about being perfect. It's about making, small, achievable changes.
So where do we even start? What are some actionable things we can do, right now? One of the most impactful things is choosing seasonal and local produce. Think about it. Out-of-season produce often travels thousands of miles to reach your plate, using tons of energy and resources along the way.
You know what? That actually hit home for me the other day. I was craving fresh tomatoes in the middle of winter, and I realized that they would have to be flown in from who knows where. It definitely made me rethink my grocery list.
And when you do find those local seasonal gems, chances are they'll be fresher and taste even better.
Okay, seasonal and local. Got it. What else should we be thinking about?
Consider seeking out products from farms that practice, organic and regenerative agriculture, whenever possible.
Organic, I get, but what exactly is regenerative agriculture? Is that just a fancy buzzword?
It's definitely more than just a buzzword. While organic focuses on reducing harmful chemicals, regenerative agriculture takes it a step further by actively improving the health of the soil and encouraging biodiversity.
So it's like taking care of the land for the long haul, making sure it can keep producing amazing food for generations to come.
That's a great way to put it. One fascinating regenerative practice is called carbon farming, where farmers actually use techniques like cover cropping to pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in the soil. Imagine turning your farm into a carbon sink. You're fighting climate change and growing more nutritious food simultaneously.
That's incredible. So it's a win for the planet and a win for us. Since healthy soil produces more nutrient-rich food, okay, this is starting to get exciting. We've talked about seasonal, local, organic, and regenerative. What's next on our sustainable shopping checklist?
Let's talk about something we all encounter every day, packaging. It may seem mundane, but this is actually where you have a lot of power to make a real difference.
Oh boy, don't get me started on packaging. It's like everything comes wrapped in layers of plastic these days. It can feel impossible to escape.
I hear you. But here's where things get interesting. You can significantly reduce your packaging footprint just by making a few simple changes. First, just be mindful at the store. Choose products in recyclable or reusable containers over plastic whenever you have the option.
So I'm swapping that plastic container of berries for the cardboard one. Got it. What else can I do?
Look for products with minimal packaging in general, or brands that are using innovative, sustainable materials. And of course, buying in bulk can be a game changer.
I've started doing that for things like grains and nuts, and it really does make a difference. Plus, I feel like I'm saving money in the long run.
You're right, bulk buying can be more economical. And if you're really feeling ambitious, try seeking out zero-waste stores in your area.
Zero waste stores, are those like super intense, only for hardcore environmentalists kind of places?
Not at all. They're becoming more and more mainstream and are surprisingly fun to shop at. You bring your own containers and fill them up with all sorts of things: grains, beans, spices, even cleaning products. I recently found an amazing zero-waste store that even has a refill station for laundry detergent. It's amazing how much plastic I've eliminated just by making that one change.
Wow, that's really cool. I'm definitely going to have to look for a zero waste store near me. So we've talked about individual choices like buying local and being mindful of packaging. But is there anything we can do to take it to the next level and get more involved in our communities?
There absolutely is. Farm to Fork is not just about individual actions. It's about supporting a local food system as a whole.
Hmm.
And there are some fantastic ways to get involved. Have you ever heard of community-supported agriculture, or CSAs?
CSAs, I've heard the term, but I'm not totally sure what they are.
It's a really cool concept. Basically, you become a member of a local farm, and they provide you with a regular share of their harvest, fresh, seasonal produce delivered right to your doorstep. Or sometimes you pick it up from a central location. It's like a subscription box for amazing food that supports local farmers.
So you're like directly connected to the farm and get to experience the seasonality of the food firsthand. I like that. What about farmers markets? Are those just trendy outings for Instagram, or do they play a role in the farm to fork movement?
Farmers markets are so much more than just a place to snap a photo of your kale. They're all about building relationships with local farmers and really getting a sense of what your region has to offer. You can ask questions about how the food was grown, learn new recipes, and connect with the people who are putting food on your table.
I love the idea of getting to know the faces behind the food we eat. It makes the whole experience so much more meaningful. It makes me wonder if we could take it a step further and try growing some of our own food.
I was just thinking the same thing. Even if you don't have a big backyard, you can grow herbs on a windowsill or start a small container garden on your balcony. It's such a fun way to connect with the food cycle and appreciate where your food comes from. Plus, there's nothing quite like the satisfaction of eating something you grew yourself.
I bet those homegrown tomatoes taste even sweeter. And hey, if you're really feeling ambitious, you could even volunteer at a local farm or community garden.
That's another fantastic way to get involved. Volunteering is a great way to learn about sustainable farming practices, meet like-minded people, and really give back to your community.
So far, we've focused a lot on choosing local produce. But there's so much more to the farm to fork concept, right? Like, what about all the processed foods we encounter on a daily basis? Where do they fit into all of this?
That's a great point. Processed foods are definitely a big part of the conversation. One of the key principles of Farm to Fork is reducing your reliance on highly processed foods and embracing, whole, unadulterated ingredients.
I can see how that aligns with the idea of shorter supply chains and knowing where your food comes from. But let's be real, processed foods are everywhere. Sometimes it feels like they're unavoidable. How do we even begin to navigate that?
It all comes back to making informed choices. Start by reading labels carefully and paying attention to the ingredients list. Look for products with fewer ingredients and ingredients you can actually recognize and pronounce.
So basically, if I can't pronounce it, I probably shouldn't be eating it.
That's a pretty good rule of thumb. Another thing to watch out for is added sugars, unhealthy fats, and artificial ingredients. The more you can cook from scratch using whole, fresh ingredients, the better.
I've been trying to do more cooking at home lately, and it's amazing how much better I feel when I'm eating, real whole foods. It's like my body is actually thanking me.
That's exactly what happens. Your body thrives on nutrient-rich foods that haven't been stripped of their goodness through excessive processing. And when you cook at home, you have complete control over what goes into your food. No hidden surprises or mystery ingredients.
Plus, it can be really fun and creative. I love experimenting with new recipes and flavors.
And don't forget about the economic benefits of reducing your reliance on processed foods. When you cook at home, you're saving money on expensive prepackaged meals and supporting local farmers and businesses by purchasing fresh ingredients.
So it's a win for our wallets, a win for our health, and a win for the local economy. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. But I have a question. We've talked a lot about the environmental and economic benefits of farm to fork. But what about the social impact? Does this approach have broader implications for communities?
It absolutely does. When you support local food systems, you're strengthening community bonds and creating a more resilient and sustainable food network. Farmers markets and CSAs provide spaces for people to connect, share knowledge, and build relationships.
It's like creating a web of interconnectedness within a community, fostering a sense of shared responsibility for our food.
Exactly. And that sense of community extends beyond just the people buying and selling food. It can also create opportunities for education and skill building through things like community gardens, urban farming initiatives, and workshops on sustainable food practices.
This is all so inspiring. It makes me realize that Farm to Fork is about so much more than just the food we eat. It's about building a better world for ourselves and future generations.
And remember, it's not about achieving some unattainable level of perfection. It's about progress over perfection.
I love that. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
Farm to Fork is a journey, not a destination. It's about taking those small steps, making conscious choices whenever you can, and celebrating those wins along the way.
And journeys are meant to be enjoyed, right? It's not about deprivation or guilt. It's about savoring good food, supporting our communities, and taking care of our planet.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And speaking of enjoying the journey, let's talk about practical strategies for actually implementing these farm-to-fork principles in our everyday lives. It's great to have all these ideas swirling around, but how do we actually turn them into lasting habits?
You're absolutely right. It's all about making those ideas actionable. One of the simplest yet most effective things you can do is, plan your meals.
Okay, I can already hear some groans out there. Meal planning, I get it. It can feel a little daunting.
Yeah.
But tell me why it's so important in the context of farm-to-fork. When you have a plan, you're less likely to make impulse purchases at the grocery store, which often leads to, food waste. Plus, you can strategically use up leftovers and avoid those sad, wilting veggies in the back of your fridge.
You're speaking my language. I hate throwing away food, so anything that helps me prevent that is a win in my book. So how do we make meal planning less of a chore and more of a fun part of our routine?
Think of it as a way to get creative in the kitchen. You can browse farmers market websites, or local farm stands for inspiration, and plan your meals around what's fresh and in season. It's like a culinary adventure.
And I bet those meals taste even better, knowing you're supporting local farmers and reducing your environmental impact. What are some other strategies for making those farm-to-fork choices more second nature?
Another simple but powerful shift is to incorporate more plant-based meals into your week.
I've been hearing a lot about the benefits of plant-based eating lately, both for our health and the planet. But going completely vegan feels a bit extreme for me. Are there ways to do this, like gradually?
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Start small by swapping out a few meat-heavy meals each week for, vegetarian or vegan options. You might be surprised at how delicious and satisfying those meals can be.
I'm actually really intrigued by this. Maybe I'll challenge myself to a meatless Monday. What are some other, easy swaps we can make?
Think about incorporating more beans, lentils, and tofu into your meals. They're packed with protein and nutrients, and they're much more sustainable to produce than meat.
Those are great ideas. I'm starting to see how even small shifts can make a big difference. What about those times when we do find ourselves reaching for, packaged or processed foods? Any tips for navigating those tricky situations?
It all comes back to being a conscious consumer. Read labels carefully and pay attention to the ingredient list. Look for products with fewer ingredients and ingredients you can actually recognize and pronounce.
So it's about getting curious about what's actually in our food and making informed choices.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. If you're at a restaurant, don't hesitate to inquire about sourcing or ask if they have any farm-to-table options.
That's a great reminder. Sometimes we forget that we have the power to ask those questions and make those requests. It's about advocating for ourselves and for the kind of food system we want to support.
You got it. And remember, every little bit counts. Even if you can only implement a few of these strategies, you're still making a positive impact.
Well said. It's been such an enlightening conversation. We've gone from feeling a little overwhelmed by this whole farm-to-fork concept to feeling empowered and excited to put these ideas into action. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners as they embark on their own farm-to-fork journeys?
Remember that farm-to-fork is not a destination. It's a continuous journey of discovery and connection. Embrace the seasonality of food. Get curious about where your food comes from. And find joy in nourishing yourself and your community.
Beautifully said. And don't forget to have fun along the way. Experiment with new recipes, visit local farms, connect with fellow food lovers, and savor every delicious bite. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Farm to Fork, everyone. We hope you've learned something new, gained some practical tips, and most importantly, feel inspired to make a difference one bite at a time.